Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Council meeting on today, Thursday, the 18th July 2024, in the full Council Chambers, Nelson Town Hall. From the agenda, any apologies?
Mr. Mayor, apologies from the councillors Kevin Salter, David Coleman-Price, Sarah Coleman-Price, Neil Butterworth, Sean Thornrod, Kieran Ladry isn't here yet, and May turn up. But apologies, just to change the call.
Mr. David?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I've got apologies from councillors Hamid, Charles Armstrong and
Thank you, Councillor Whip.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can I give apologies from Councillor Susan Land, who's in Staffordshire, and Councillor Mick Strickland, who's working away. He had hoped to be back, but he said to give his apologies if he wasn't here by 7. So he may or may not turn up, but I suspect there may not be. Thank you.
Thank you,
Mr. Mayor. Can I give apologies for Councillor Naeem Ashraf, please?
Next is declaration of interest. Anyone? Thank you. Next is item number 3, minutes of the council approved as a correct record or otherwise the minutes of the annual council meeting held on 17th May 2024. Second. Malik, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, could I just raise a query? It says 16th of May on the sheets, and it says 17th of May on the pink sheet on the agenda. Without casting my mind back, I don't know which is correct. 17th, so could I suggest that we amend the minutes to get the date right?
Just for information, the apologies from Councillor Russell is you have a simple button and it's just for information. Thank you. Number 5, announcement from the Mayor and the Leader of the Council. So, could I start by thanking from the councillors, members of the public, as you may know or may not know, it is Jane Watson's last full council meeting tonight, as she is retiring next month. I would personally like to thank her for all the hard work she has put in over the years. She will be a hard act to follow. I wish her all the best on her retirement. Then from my side, I'd like to represent Jane with King Charles III. And King Charles III. And a silver spoon to go with the cup. Thank you very much. Councillor Whip.
Mr. Mayor, can I echo your congratulations or commiserations, whichever they may be, to Jane. I think her service to the council has been exemplary over many decades, and I'm just trying to recollect, but I think Jane and I started around about the same time. Jane is obviously aged better than I, and Jane began work in the planning department across in Colne, when we had offices there with Richard Kirby, who was then the head of that section. And we have exchanged reminiscences from time to time about the plans subcommittee teas held in the basement of Colne Town Hall back in the day. And Jane has obviously devoted her working life to Pendle Council. It's from a planning perspective through to the role that she currently has managing the unruly and very, very busy committee section and the democratic services element. So on a personal note and on behalf of my group, I would very much like to wish Jane very well in her retirement. I did overhear somebody mentioning last night that retirement isn't all that it's cracked up to be. Jane raised an eyebrow at that point, but I think that she's got a rich and varied life, a great family, and I'm sure that she will thrive in retirement and outside the hurly-burly of Pendle Council, and wish you all the very best.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Like you say, it's a very difficult act to follow. I think Jane's contribution to the council and civil service in itself is massive. You are a brilliant civil servant, and thank you for all your contribution in supporting more committees within Pendle Council, and helping and supporting all the members, especially when they're newly elected, to get them find their feet. So after retirement, and all the best, and love this.
Councillor Jessup.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I stand, try not to embarrass Jane, but as you said, I echo what you said and what the leader said and what Councillor Ripper said, that Jane is a devoted worker at Pendle Council. She's been here for, I think if we go back to when Councillor Whip came on, we're looking at about 30-40 years. I think he reminds us that he's been in this council maybe longer. I'm trying not to show Jane's age here. But when I found out a few months back that Jane was retiring, I had to ask myself and ask Jane in particular, are you actually retiring or are you leaving? Because Jane, as Councillor Ripper said, has aged probably better than all of us, and I was genuinely shocked. I'm trying not to embarrass Jane that she was nearing that retirement. I know she took it slightly earlier. But can I, on behalf of everyone, thank Jane for her devoted service. When I was in the position that you're in, Mr. Mayor, I learned that experience that Jane has was demonstrated on every meeting, because she knew the answers as well as our learned legal officer and the one before him in the form of, what was he called? Philip Mosdale. And it was Philip and Jane that knew the answers almost immediately, and that shows the experience that she has and the service that Jane and her family, because I know that there's more than one Watson in Pendle Council. And I'll tell you a funny story, because I was on the council for about 10 years, and I didn't put the two and two together. I didn't know that Mr. Watson and Mrs. Watson were from the same household. And it was a development management committee meeting, and I was speaking to Neil, and I approached Neil to ask him a question, and I saw a picture of Jane Watson on Neil Watson's floor. And I thought, hang on, have I restored something here? This is a scandal. Then it immediately occurred to me that, it's Mr. Watson, Mrs. Watson, but can I thank you again, Jane, for the committee service, and we will genuinely miss you. We've had a good communication, a good relationship with the council. You always assisted us, and hope that when you look back at these meetings on YouTube, when you watch these meetings live in the future, that we will give you some entertainment, and that as we know that you are a civil servant, as the leader said, and I want to thank you personally on behalf of everyone from the council for all the you've shown, and I wish you a very long and happy retirement. As Councillor Ritter said, if it's not what it's made out to be, then our doors are always open, and I'm sure everyone will welcome you back. It's not the first time, it has happened in the past, so I wouldn't write off completely, but as far as we're concerned, our doors are certainly open, and I would personally welcome you back. If you want to come part-time, even if you want to come for these meetings, then that does open for you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Councillor Nadeem.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to embarrass Jane again now, just echoing what Councillor Iqbal was just talking about in terms of Jane retiring. In our pre-meeting, Mr. Mayor came in and said, oh, this is Jane's last full council meeting. And I did actually say to my colleague, he said, is Jane retiring? She's not old enough to retire. And so honestly, that's a good thing. But on a serious note, I think Jane's experience, her knowledge, her patience with us councillors sometimes, we are sometimes a difficult bunch, but Jane's handled it really, really well. And I think we really miss having Jane around in the council, and the help that she gives to us councillors, and guiding us in the right direction, and the information. We had the pleasure of having Jane at our Barrowford and Western Pastures Area Committee meeting last week. And Jane is really helpful in terms of some of the questions we didn't know the answers to. I've been on the council for 20 odd years, I didn't know the answers, and Jane said, no, this is how you do it, that's the direction. And we do, as members, need that steer sometimes. So that experience, that knowledge, and having Jane around, we will really miss Jane. We wish you all the very best and happy retirement.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Zafar.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can I also join colleagues in, I suppose, commemorating this special occasion for Jane? In fact, yesterday at last night's executive meeting, I did offer Jane the chance to swap retirement with Neil, because he's another one that's, I suppose, could do with retirement other than Jane. But with all due respect, I think he's been a fantastic servant to Pendle Council. Me being elected back in 2019, having different shots taken on, I'm sure everybody's had the portraits taken, and Jane said, are you happy with this one? Do you want to take another one? People like myself and Councillor Faraz, who's not here tonight, but always wanting that best side of us. So thank you for persevering and being patient with us. As councillors have said, we can be a rowdy bunch at times, but you will dearly be missed, and we wish you a very happy retirement.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Dorothy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Jane, what are you doing to us? Really? I'd like to, I've known Jane for going on for 25 years now, and I just, what I admire in Jane is her calmness, her smile, always smiling, calmness. I don't think she's probably like that all the time inside. And when she gets home, to Neil, I'm sure you'll miss us all, as we will miss you. So thank you for everything you've done.
Thank you.
And get some decent coffee in your office
I'm
before
sure
you
you
go.
will. Make sure there's some point. Thank you.
Councillor Newman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Jane, I'd just like to say I wish you health and happiness for the future, but retirement is not what it's cracked up to be.
Yeah, the last thing, another one, I requesting every councillor elected to work together and let's move Pendle out of the disaster what we are already. We are short of the funds. We need funds, as Councillor Wick has mentioned, and other councillors as well from all parties. What I'm requesting is all councillors to work together. Thank you. Rita?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I also want to thank Damon Ronson. This is his last meeting as well, Pendle Council. Damon's been with us for a couple of months now, about 8 months, 7 months. And thank you very much for all your help and all your hard work. You're a very experienced, very knowledgeable person who kind of hit the ground running straight away. And you managed to get the answers. Sometimes we it will take months and months to get approval. So a big thank you and for everything, and all the very best in the future as well.
Next is question number 6. Questions or notices from the public to the leader. No. Next is the questions or notices by the members to the leader, committee, chairman, representative on the outside body on matters not otherwise on the agenda. A report by the leader on the work of the executive.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm happy to read the report as set out.
Next is number 9, interim audit annual report 2021, 22 and 23 and 24. To consider the attack report and receive a presentation from Georgia Jones and Grant Thornton.
Thank you very much. Hello everyone, my name is Georgia Jones. I'm a director at Grant Thornton, and Grant Thornton are the external auditors for the council. So this evening I'm bringing our auditors' annual report. As has been referred to, this covers 2 years, which is 21-22 and 22-23. So this covers the elements of our work that looks at value for money. So we have 2 elements of work. We audit the financial statements of the council, and we also do our value for money work. So just to be clear, this is not a judgment on whether the council provides value for money. This is us looking at whether you have the arrangements in place to enable you to do so. Also, obviously, as stated, because it relates to custodians that I've mentioned, it is a retrospective report. So it's looking at arrangements in place over those 2 years. So appreciate since then things may have changed and things may have moved on. So I just wanted to put that context. It is looking at the arrangements in place during those 2 years. We've brought it to full council. We normally take our reports to audit committee, but at our suggestion it was brought to full council because there are a number of what we call key recommendations in there. And we thought it would be helpful for all members to be aware of those in terms of the recommendations we're making and management's response to those recommendations. So we can make a number of types of recommendations. So where we feel that there is a significant weakness in arrangements, we make what's called a key recommendation. And there are 4 of those set out in this report. We can also make improvement recommendations. So there are a number of those in the report. An improvement recommendation is more like good practice. So where there's improvement recommendations, we're saying actually your arrangements are perfectly adequate, but if you really want to implement good practice, you can consider these improvement recommendations. So really the more kind of, I suppose, important or significant ones are the key recommendations in the report. This doesn't apply to the council currently, but we could also potentially, we have statutory powers. So if we need to escalate anything above key recommendations, we also have certain statutory powers with your auditor, where we can make statutory recommendations, we can issue public interest reports, etc. And you may have seen those sort of things in other councils around the country, public interest reports on various things that kind of happens at those particular councils. I'd say that is not the case here. We are making key recommendations which management have accepted and are taking forward. So what I was going to do is take the report as read, but just really go through the key recommendations for you, and then obviously happy to take any questions on any of the detail as well. So really, if you look at our executive summary, which is on page 3 of the report, that just gives you a really easy high-level table where you can see where the key recommendations sit. So we look at 3 types of criteria in our value for money work. We look at financial sustainability, governance, and improving economy, efficiency and effectiveness. So those criteria are set out by the National Audit Office in the Code of Practice. So the National Audit Office issues a Code of Practice, and that sets out the work that auditors need to do within local government. So then just following on to page 5, that just sets out those other powers that we do have just for your information. So that's if things at some point in the future needed to be escalated, we could potentially employ those powers if we thought it necessary and required. The next few pages are really just kind of summaries around kind of the explanations of what those 3 criteria are, and obviously the a little bit about the current local government landscape, which obviously you'll all be aware of. So the key recommendations, they start on page 9 of the report. The first one is around financial sustainability, and this is looking at kind of medium-term plans for the council, what your kind of forecast is of your income and expenditure, whether there are any budget gaps, and whether the council has plans in place to close those budget gaps. So when we've looked at it, there is kind of like there was significant gaps going forward at that time in the medium-term financial plan. So for us, given the kind of current position of local government, obviously, you know, not just kind of for Pendle, those financial pressures on councils and the increase in demand on services, then for an auditor that is something fairly significant if you've got gaps going forward in your financial plan for which you haven't got kind of approved and monitored savings plans in place. So you really kind of need those in place. So we set out that there, we set out why it's needed, what our judgment around it is, and just summarise the findings. And then underneath you'll see management comments. So as I previously said, management have accepted all the recommendations in terms of those key recs. And they set out there what they intend to do to address those recommendations that we've made. So again, you know, as I say, this is retrospective, so you know things are moving on, and you know it just sets up there about the budget setting post for 24-25, and looking at kind of the recommendation we've made in light of that. So what we would do as part of our 23-24 value for money work, we will go back, revisit these recommendations, look at the actions management said they will put into place, and we will assess whether we think those actions have been put into place and have moved forward, and then again report back in our value for money report in 23-24. Then the following recommendation is around kind of how the kind of planning decisions are made really. So it's around really kind of the decision-making process in terms of some of those planning decisions, and the fact that sometimes the councils have to kind of defend appeals in terms of those decisions, which obviously is a cost to the council, which potentially could be avoided. So again, as auditors, you know, where we think there's potentially unnecessary costs or costs that could be avoided, then, you know, we're going to kind of look at that, raise it with yourselves and make some recommendations around that. So again, our recommendation was actually you should get some kind of independent legal advice on your processes, just to make sure that it is fully compliant and you're complying with all required arrangements in terms of that. So again, management accepted that recommendation and agreed to kind of obtain that advice, just to make sure that the council does indeed comply with all requirements and is, you know, making their planning decisions in an efficient and cost-effective way. And the third key recommendation is around the kind of the change from committee system to leader and executive, and making sure that is a successful move forward. And you know, again, you know, we've suggested that we should kind of obtain some advice on that to make sure that that kind of is a smooth transition, and that all the decision making that the council does and that councillors make runs as it should and is appropriate as well. So we've just set that out there, and again, just making sure those governance structures, decision making systems, and kind of member and officer interaction just supports kind of, you know, the council's strategy going forward. Again, management has set out their acceptance of that and set out the plans in place, the actions in place to address that recommendation. And then lastly, we've got one about the joint ventures of the council. So there is obviously kind of that kind of close working relationship between the council and its joint ventures. But we just really need clarity about relationships and responsibilities of members across those kind of joint ventures and the council itself. You've got to have kind of obviously the really strong governance arrangements in place to support that whole arrangement. And it's really important that, you know, if members are directors, that they declare any conflicts of interest so that that can be taken account in any decision making of the council. And we found that wasn't actually always the case. So we're making a recommendation around that to make sure that, again, you commission some advice to make sure that you, all those kind of governance arrangements underpinning the joint ventures and the council's relationship with them are strong and in place, and you know, doesn't leave you open to any kind of conflicts of interest. So again, management have accepted that and they've set out their response there. So The rest of the report really just puts a bit of meat on the bones of kind of the different areas that we've looked at. As I say, I wasn't prepared to go through that in any detail. And then also, as I mentioned, there are a number of recommendations across the different criteria, and those recommendations are improvement recommendations, so they're the good practice recommendations. So I'm not sure if that's kind of sufficient information for you, but obviously I'm happy to take any questions on the report.
Councillor Whip.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank Georgia for can I say Georgia?
Yes, of course.
Georgia Rose for her presentation at the council tonight. And it may well be something that some councillors haven't had the auditor come along and give the report. I'm trying to not say unfortunately, I have heard quite a few over the years, but you know, these are very clear, very important issues that we need to consider. As was referenced, this is a retrospective look back at the 2 years because we're on catch up. And in terms of the joint ventures, I think I was saying some of the things in meetings that are perhaps reflected in this report tonight, because there was inadequate governance at the time, and there were certainly things that were being discussed, which both as a member of Pendleborough Council and as a member, a director of the joint ventures, I wasn't aware of. And you know, I was asking questions about, well, hang on, where's this come from? So I think that criticism is justly levelled. I'm pleased to say that in the last year we have got a grip on this, and I think that the governance that we have now is much stronger and properly regulated. So hopefully that issue is something that we can continue to work on and get it right to the satisfaction. In terms of the first key recommendation, I've stood in this council chamber many times to say, look, you know, we've got a budget that relies on reserves, that we need to find those savings, and by hook or by crook, we do manage to effect savings. I think looking back again at the 2 years that under examination here, there was an unfortunate drawdown on reserves, which was the highest in Lancashire at the end of 22-23, and that's an unfortunate position. In the budget that we set back in February of this year, looking forward, we were able to set a balanced budget, put a modest amount of money back into reserves, and I'm hopeful that we can continue on that track. But that is not to dismiss the challenges that there are in terms of new costs coming along, and I would highlight the cost shunting from Lancashire County Council in terms of waste transfer, which is going to cost this, well, not only this authority but other East Lancashire authorities many millions of pounds to actually address. And clearly these are costs that we would rather not be incurring, and we would rather the County Council continue to bear those costs. But nevertheless, we've got statutory responsibility, the County Council, to lay down the law on these things. So I think the words are well said. I think all councillors are at least aware of the seriousness of the situation. and I'm hopeful that councillors as a whole will come to a consensus about how we can address those. I had a comment or a question about the planning process, which I'll cut short because I'm subject to the red light. And it's in terms of the King's speech this week and the government's stated intention to modernise the planning system. Does the auditor agree that we need to take account of that new legislation and the new processes that are apparently going to be put in place? And I'll conclude statements about that, but I think Councillor Tom may have indicated he wants to come on the planning thing. Thank you.
Councillor Lester.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for this report. We'll take this on board and we'll try to use it, but we will implement these recommendations that are set out. So I'm happy to move the report. The comment I'd like to make is, especially on the planning aspect of things, we have moved to the executive model. So previously it was a policy resources committee that dealt with all the planning matters that were referred from the committees. And now we have sales committees, then we have a development management committee that can deal with most of the issues that arise where there might be a difference of opinion, because the office is according to judicial planning decisions. And I think something, because it depends, unique in the sense when you've got rural and urban areas, and somebody from, a member from that Brownfield will not have the same kind of level of understanding of constituents or the needs, or somebody for example like Barnolds, we can't handle that vice versa. But we take the recommendation on board, fully understand that, and we'll try to implement those as soon as we can. And just touching on Councillor Lake's point about the we look at the balanced budget this year, and we will continue to do that, and we'll have a robust medium-term financial plan. I talked about some member training, which again, that's been picked up. With Pearl Board as well, the work is in progress, things have improved dramatically over the last year or so. So I'm hoping to be able to resolve and implement the recommendation that's been said.
Nadine.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, thank you, George Jones, for the presentation. I think it's interesting, really, to say the least, and really serious and key recommendations within the report, which we all have to take very seriously indeed. So in terms of just touching upon the first one, in terms of financial sustainability, I think most members, first of all, need to have an honest and transparent discussion in terms of where we go with the budget and our spending, because there are, as the report says, and as you said in your presentation, that there are gaps in our budget, and quite clearly there aren't clear plans as to how we're going to fill them gaps. I think that's the key point. And there are certain aspects of the cost implication and what we as a council have to spend which are not in our control. Council work touched upon in terms of the cost of for example LCC, but there are things which are in our control as members that we need to get rid of. If things happen externally, sometimes really difficult for us, and there's nothing we can do as members, but I think certainly there are decisions which we make in this council chamber are having a knock-on effect on the budget. Second, in terms of the governance and the planning matter that was discussed, I think what we looking at in the report and mentioned is it's about decisions which are being made against officer recommendation. I think that's the key point. Because whether the decision is being made by the Nelson councillor or an Oswald councillor, Cornwall councillor, the policy is the same as the policy of this council, which approved, and there's national legislation as well within that. So I think that's the key point, is the implications of officer recommendation. And we've all been guilty of it, including myself, where officer advice is given, we're told there's going to be potential cost implications, appeals, etc., and we've gone against that advice. And I think we all need to, as members, need to reflect on that. Because I think if we are going to be serious about these recommendations, I think we need to be honest with ourselves first. In terms of the joint venture, never really thought about it, because that's how this council's always done it. Members, the directors of various boards have been, and I've currently have on one of them. But sometimes I think perhaps we don't really reflect on the role and its responsibilities and the seriousness of it, the legal implications we have as directors. And there is that real aspect, which I've never considered in 20 years, but recently I've been thinking about a bit more, is the real conflict of interest when we're sitting on these boards. Because on the one hand, when we're sitting on a particular board, we're there to look after the interests of the company as directors, that's our legal responsibility. And that's the paramount, I think. But on the other hand, we sit there as councillors. So if we sat in a meeting and it's potentially going to have a knock-on effect, and council we then say, as directors of a company, oh, we don't want to do that because it's going to cost the council. So there's a real complication, a real conflict there, which I think needs addressing. I think we as members need advice and assistance as well, I think. So I think there is that real difficulty. So there needs to be perhaps a separation. But how we do that, because we've still got real responsibility in ensuring, if there is a joint venture company, that we are there at the table and are scrutinising the decisions, because they are going to have a knock-on effect on our residents and the taxpayer. So how we balance the two, I'm not clear, so we'll seek advice and look into that further. So once again, thank you. There are key recommendations which we need to implement. Thank you.
Mr. Stone.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Georgia, for this very interesting and informative report. Mr. Mayor, I'd like to start off by picking up your exhortation to councillors to work together in recognising and resolving the many issues in this report. And accordingly, I did want to say on financial sustainability that I recognise that this is fairly widely understood now, and most councillors, I'm sure, are very well aware of the issues that are outlined in this report. So I won't focus any more on that, but I did want to say, in that spirit of cooperation, that some positive work was done through the Budget Working Group last year, and I know that Councillor Whip, as the Cabinet Member for Resources, is working as best he can to address these issues. What I wanted to speak on particularly, though, was picking up Nadim's point on joint ventures. I've been in this council, member of this council for 2 years. I can probably count on the fingers of one hand the number of times that the joint ventures have ever been mentioned. I would say that I know relatively little about them, and what I know about them is through personal research. And that speaks to the point that you have raised so eloquently in your report. There is, it seems to me, a lack of transparency and a lack of accountability around the joint ventures. I have never heard a conflict of interest being declared by any members who are on the board of directors of Pearl. And I'm shocked to read on page 21, I think, where you mentioned there have been instances of members advocating for the interests of the company's council officers, for example, about the timing of loan payments, potentially against the interests of the council. That's a very serious accusation, and it's one that I'm sure that no member of this council would willingly want to be put in that position. And I'm sure that you know, there would be no intent in having this conflict of interest, but perhaps it's not been recognised properly. My question, I have two questions to you then, if I may. First of all, we have two cabinet members, I believe, who are also members of Pearl, directors of Pearl. So, should cabinet members of Pendle Borough Council also be on the board of Pearl? And particularly, there's a conflict, I believe. Councillor Whip is on the board of directors of Pearl and also is the cabinet member responsible for resources. And my other question is a general question. As Nadeem said, I welcome, and I'm sure that our group welcomes, the comments and the management actions which are outlined in this report. I think it's a good report. These are important and necessary actions. My second question then to you as an auditor, I know we have a shared interest in this sort of thing, but do these management actions, do they have action dates, and will they be tracked and appropriately reported through to Audit Committee or Council? Thank you.
Councillor T. Whip.
Sorry, I apologise, I'm not sure the etiquette. Do I answer those questions now, or do I wait until the end?
Well, just hear from Councillor T and then will be.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and I thank you for giving me my new name, Councillor T. I don't that. On recommendation 2, the period that this audit report was looking at, there was a very poor, thinking of the word, performance in the planning system at that time, in terms of the timeliness of decisions. Since then, we have had better outcomes. We've moved to a central planning committee for large developments, as well as deferred decisions, or indeed decisions that were turned down and an officer review have said there's a risk of cost. That backs up to the planning committee. So, I mean, I feel that we have had that review of the way we decide planning applications at this council recently. In terms of the timeliness now, we're on about 96-98% in time, which is an exemplary statistic. It's one of the in the group the highest in the country. To say that the way we're deciding planning applications isn't timely, I think doesn't represent the position you're in now, but I understand this is done on previous years, so I'll take that on board. In terms of appeals, I do have recent data on the number of appeals in the last 2 years. There's been 56 in the last 2 years. Of those that have been decided under delegation, 18 were dismissed and 7 allowed. And those that went to the Central Planning Committee, 13 dismissed and 9 allowed. And 9 withdrawn to make up to 56. So I think the system we do have now does work. It does work timely, and I think it does come to good results. There is still some things that I think is a bit, it does need considering. For example, judicial reviews. We've had a situation recently in the Colne Area Committee where that decision was taken. And I feel that maybe that power shouldn't be with the area committees, significant risk of costs there. But yeah, it works. In regards to recommendation 6, I mean, I wholly welcome the idea of consulting on the budget. Bogota famously moved to a democratised a democratised budget where it's sort of workshops set up around the city, asking people what they thought of how the council was spending their money, and that led to a much greater trust in local governance, which I think is something dearly missed in this current day and age. So if we could move to a democratised budget for Pendle Council, where the budget is workshopped with residents and businesses to get a better idea of the priorities and have a more informed decision, I think that's a very welcome change for the council. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Apologies before, I wasn't quite sure when I answered the question, so I'll try and hopefully remember the question that comes. So I think there's a question earlier on about the new potential planning legislation, so obviously we await to see the detail of that, so the council will of course have to have a look at that when it is published and it's gone through the parliamentary processes, and incorporate that into whatever needs to be done in terms of kind of your own processes and arrangements would be my take on that one. In terms of cabinet members being on the board, so this is why we've said we suggest you commission proper legal advice, because yes, we're auditors, we can look at something, we can go, this does not feel right, and here is a risk that is now materialising for the council, a risk of conflict of interest. But you need experts really to advise you on actually what should the governance arrangements be, where should the lines be drawn. So again, hopefully that will come out of that advice that has been commissioned. In terms of following up the recommendation, yes, so we'll do our community work 23-24, which is actually commencing in the next few weeks, and part of that will be following up in detail all of the recommendations, but especially with a focus on the key recommendations that we've made to make sure that the council is taking the actions that they've said they would take, and we will report back. Normally again we report to audit committee, but obviously if councils would wish to see that report, I'd be happy to bring it to full council and leave that decision to yourselves. And it was helpful to have those updates as well on kind of the current situation. So again, whilst we do work in 23-24, we'll reflect on what has changed since that previous work, and again, incorporate that kind of reporting into our kind of auditor's report for that year. And hopefully I think that was all of the queries, but if I've missed something, please do let me know.
Is that okay? Right.
Can I just add one thing? I just wanted to thank members for kind of being so positive, receiving the report so positively, and engaging with us in terms of kind of what we've reported and the feedback. So I thank you all for that.
Next is
Mr. Mayor, can I formally second that we received the report?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Can we have a roll call? All in favour? That's a full house. Next is number 10, corporate plan, refresh 23-24. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, move the recommendations as set out in the corporate plan refresh 24-25 report. I'll ask the key 4 areas of the corporate plan with providing high quality services and facilities, carbon effective community interfaces, good growth, healthy communities, and details within the plan. So how do you
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just on priority 2, climate emergency, I would like to move an amendment that we add that the council supports the rollout of air source heat pumps across the borough. And the reason for that is we've had decisions in this chamber in the past against the implementation of air source heat pumps in developments that we're in the joint venture. Mr. Mayor, they're a well-proven technology and used extensively in other countries. However, I do feel that there's been some comments by officers at working groups which don't, in the vein of not supporting air pumps because they might be noisy, or if you don't maintain them, they cause a racket. And I just want our corporate plan to reflect the necessity of supporting green energies green sources of heat like air source heat pumps in net zero for the borough. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Yes.
Mr. Mayor, I'm not sure whether I need to second the amendment about that, whether the mover will take it on board.
Yeah, yes.
So the heat pumps, these are the fan pumps? Yeah. Because the one comment I would make is, I think we discussed this was the last year. Yeah. I think it was both a cost element of within the heat pumps. I think we tried to look at it for, I think it was the Spring Mill in Eden, if I remember correctly. Comment for full details. And I think the costing at that time they were quite astronomical. So I'm fully in favour of energy efficiency and fully support that. I think the cost element, I think we need to have a look at and maybe we can bring it back
Councillor Rubiano.
Yeah, I was going to say, I know a lot of people are passionate about climate change and that's kind of rippling through organisations across the country. But I think when it comes to amendments, when priorities are already set out, I think sometimes it can be a little bit dangerous that when we come to full council that we ask for an amendment which is quite big and for it not to have been considered fully before the meeting or discussed between political groups and our council officers. I think I would be against not the idea of the heat pumps but the idea of adding an amendment and pushing it through on tonight's meeting without really considering the full thing. And I think that's something going forward we need to also spruce up on a little bit, that when we do want things happening, that we have a bit of more discussion before it comes to full council. So what I'm saying is maybe Councillor Teaguet can maybe consider that it's discussed at another time, but not actually added as an amendment today.
Mr. Mayor, I was in the midst of...
No, it's okay. I'll give way to...
I was in the midst of seconding...
Can you please sit down and then speak out?
Mr. Mayor, I was seconding...
It's okay, I'll let council with you.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, I was seconding the amendment and I gave way to see whether the leader was accepting. So I haven't actually seconded the amendment. So we do need to second it in order to be able to discuss it. Mr. Culshaw's nodding vigorously. So I would like to second this. Councillor Whip Councillor Tom Whip, not Councillor T, but Councillor Tom Whip had a meeting with Together Housing very recently. The issue of air source heat pumps arose during that meeting, and the representatives from Together Housing were aghast that Pendle Council, and particularly its joint venture, the Pearl Together joint venture, which I will declare an interest as a member of the board, had not included air source heat pumps in the development at Spring Mill. And they were aghast because it is Together Housing's policy, wherever a property comes empty, to actually install air source heat pumps to remove gas boilers and to put the energy efficiency and the climate benefits of air source heat pumps at the cornerstone of the work that they're doing. And they're currently investing a significant amount of money in upgrading insulation and the installation of air source heat pumps in order to achieve their climate objectives. Now, I understand there was a meeting of the Climate Emergency Working Group on Monday of this week when this topic was discussed, and ASO often seems to happen with that group. There was a discussion and then it was just left in abeyance. And there wasn't the decision to, yes, we should be doing this. It seems, and EV chargers referred to on the agenda, it seems that the Climate Emergency Working Group talks a lot, but actually never gets to grips with things and never actually implements anything. So I think this is Councillor Tom Whip's attempt to move this forward, and it's quite an innocuous proposal that we support the rollout of air source heat pumps throughout the borough. Now, to my mind, that's not earth-shaking. It's not going to cause a rupture in the space-time continuum. What it will mean is that as a council, we will seek to have these much more energy efficient ways of heating people's homes rather than leaving them to be fueled by fossil fuels. So, Mr Mayor, I would appeal to members to support this. It isn't earth-shattering, but the consequences of not achieving our climate emergency objectives will be earth-shattering, because we will end up with a planet that is burning, and perhaps in another 10, 20, 30 years' time, people will look back at the decisions that we're taking now. And this is a small decision, but collectively, humanity has to take some massive decisions, and this is a very, very tiny baby step towards achieving those carbon reduction targets that, as a council, we are signed up to. And I think in terms of this evening's meeting, it's entirely reasonable. Councillor Tom Whip had the meeting within the last 24 hours. Yeah. Yesterday. And he's got this fresh information. He's brought it tonight, and I would hope people not to have a knee-jerk reaction. Oh, we can't discuss it tonight. Of course we can. We're setting the corporate plan refresh, and it's entirely reasonable for any member to come along with a suggestion to include something, however late in the day it might be. So I would appeal to members to support this and take that baby step towards having a more climate-friendly council than we've currently got.
Are you seconding that, Mr.
Yes.
Yeah. Councillor Martin.
Yeah, thank you. Totally appreciate Councillor Tom Whip and Dave Whip's comments and the passion they speak with on the specific issue of the air source heat pumps. But I have to agree with my colleague Councillor Ruby Angle. I think she talks a lot of sense on this matter, and I think it's perfectly sensible and reasonable that we don't include that amendment this evening and pass that. So I'll be voting against any such amendment. We've had discussions on this specific issue as the leader alluded to at I think it was on the Pearl meeting, and it was a detailed discussion, and I know there's been further discussions through the Climate Emergency Working Group. And I think the Climate Emergency Working Group have a really difficult task, and it is a global issue. And I think it's rather unfair to criticise the working group for the work that they're doing. They should be working in partnership with the working group rather than being critical of them. I don't think them sort of I think if we fall out with our working groups, it's not going to really help matters and move things forward. I think it's not clear. I understand there's been discussion between Councillor Tom Whip and Housing Associates, Housing Provider, and they might be really passionate about it, and so will many other people be as well. But I think from the information I have and the discussion we've had at other meetings is there's real cost implications to this. There's the practical difficulties around the noise and the space and get these air source heat pumps fitted. And I think what we're getting bogged down with is this is a general corporate plan, and I think we're getting into too much of the nitty-gritty at this point. I think it's perfectly reasonable. I agree with Councillor Ruby Anwar when she says, well, let's have these discussions outside this council chamber. Let's get the corporate plan approved and try and find a way forward. If you can come to some sort of consensus, and then we can always bring that forward. And I think I'll stand corrected, but I don't see any reason why, if that's then agreed, it can't come back to full council. We can make an amendment to the corporate plan refresh. I don't know if we'll just seek advice from officers whether that could be done at a later stage. But I think if we're all going to work on a corporate plan, at least, I won't say the coalition, but I won't use that word, the shared administration need to come to some sort of view before coming to this council, rather than debating and arguing amongst each other. It's not a good look. So there's nothing wrong with having difference of opinion, but I think that sort of discussion should have been had before tonight's meeting. I think it's rather unfair to bring on this and spring on us at the last minute. Thank you.
Could we put this to the vote? No.
After right.
I'd like to respond to the debate, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To sum up then, it is the case that it was within the last 24 hours I spoke to some representatives at Together Housing, and it put it into perspective of Pendle Council's dragging of the feet on this issue. And I think it's really important that in this document here tonight we endorse the rollout of green technologies for heating our homes. Mr. Mayor, the leader indicated there might be a cost associated to this. That's not the case. Supporting does not mean financially support. It gives guidance, this is what a corporate plan is, it gives guidance to employees on the values of this council, Mr. Mayor. And I think it's imperative that the values of this council represents its understanding of the climate emergency and that we need to embrace new technologies. Mr. Mayor, air source heat pumps, issues around noise. Mr. Mayor, if they're well maintained, they make the same amount of noise as a fridge. And I think we've all got a fridge in our homes. I think that issue has been overrepresented. A lot of people are basing the decisions on a report from 2 years ago, which is not a decisive explanation of the technology. Mr. Mayor, this chamber is for debate. I think to say that we can't discuss something here tonight is wrong. It's every member's right to bring an amendment to any motion on the table and to discuss these things properly. And I think to outright say we're not going to discuss it, go back and come back again at some other time, I think is wrong. We should be open to debate and discussion on these issues. And I'm disappointed that other members in this chamber would not engage with this activity. Mr. Mayor, I'd be happy to adjust the wording on this to be less prescriptive in air source heat pumps, if that's more amenable to people in this chamber. However, the debate's ended and I don't think we've got an opportunity to do that now. So I would urge people to support this. Supporting the rollout of air source heat pumps is very important for this borough. We do not want Pendle Council to just be saying no. And unfortunately that has been the case recently. So I thank you all very much and I urge you to support this amendment. It is very little, it's very small, and it's just giving guidance in the corporate plan to officers that we support air source heat pumps as a technology. Not necessarily in every place. There's plenty of implementations that aren't acceptable, They can't be used on homes that aren't very well insulated. And you know, the implementation of that technology is going to reflect that. Just that we tend to support them and we won't put barriers in place to their implementation. Thank you.
All those who are in favour of the amendment? All those who are against the amendment? Any abstentions? The amendment has lost. Back to the original amendment. All a motion. All those in favour? Against? Abstain. So the motion has been carried. Next. That the Council be recommendation to agree the corporate plan refresh 23-24. Number 11. Constitution to consider the effect of executive overview and scrutiny protocol for inclusion in the Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm happy to move this new protocol. I think this is very similar to the one we had previously when we had the executive model. And again, we've changed from the policy resources to the executive model. I think it's a very clear protocol that works very well in my view. So,
Second that, Mr. Mayor. It's all pretty straightforward and follows the pattern that we had when we had a previous period of executive scrutiny structure.
Councillor Nazim.
Yeah, happy to support the report that's before us. I think it's important that in terms of the roles and the functions the Organ Scrutiny Committee have, and the role of the function, that there is that distinction, and the Organ Scrutiny Committee have that power to select their own agenda and look at issues that they think will be beneficial for the council and our residents. So again, like I said, yeah, happy to support the report.
Councillor Mr. Stone.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to thank Jane for the work that she has put into the ONS and trying to clarify the relationship between ONS and executive, and also for the training and effort that's been put into that. So I also welcome this paper, this draft protocol. I note in particular that the procedures for calling through the ONS have been clarified and laid down there. I completely agree that getting this relationship right is absolutely essential to this council being able to function properly with appropriate overview and scrutiny of decisions made through the executive. So it's absolutely central to good governance, as central as the recommendations made through George's report, which we discussed earlier. So thank you, Mr. Mayor. I support this.
Mr. Tweed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to thank members for speaking in support of this. If I could draw members' attention to the first set of bullet points, bullet point 4, considering any matter affecting the area of Pendle or its inhabitants and undertake reviews aiming to improve the efficient and effective delivery of services to local people. Mr. Mayor, I'm very glad that this is in there. It's what we in the Liberal group at this council have been saying for a long time, that this should be a core purpose of the overview and scrutiny. I know that there was a lot of to-ing and froing previously around this function when we've asked the Overview and Scrutiny Committee to do that function. So I'm very thankful that members have agreed to that wording, and I'm glad we're all on the same page now that that's one of the functions, the key functions that Overview and Scrutiny should cover, and I'm in support of this. Thank you.
All those in favour? Yeah, thank you very much. Number 12, Overview and Scrutiny Committee to consider nominations for 2 vice chairs of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, 1 each from the Conservative and 1 independent group. Councillor Nadeem Ahmed.
Seeing as Councillor Stone spoke so passionately on the previous item, I'll nominate Councillor Stone from the Conservative group.
I'll take you.
Councillor.
And from the independent group, I nominate Deputy Mayor Anna. He has to say yes.
Right.
Only because if you remember, he dogged me in and made me the chair of the account, so this is my payback.
Thank you.
Who seconded the vote?
All those in...
Oh, do we not have
Oh.
Yeah, okay.
Councillor T. Whip.
Mr. Mayor, I'm just seeking clarification. It says from the Conservative and Independent groups, and we haven't had a proposal for a vice chair from the other independent group. I think you misspoke in introducing this item and said independent group. I'd just like some clarification from yourself. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Right. It's only the independent group. I got the advice from Scrutiny. So. And you? Next is item 13, notice of motion. New bill to be moved by Councillor D. Whip and seconded by Councillor D. Lord.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to move a slightly amended motion, and I'll read it out in full. Council notes the result of the general election and the election of MPs for the 2 new seats covering Pendle, thanks former MP Andrew Stevenson for his work and congratulates the 2 new MPs on their election. Council further notes the continuing impact of austerity on residents in Pendle, with further cuts in services required to produce a balanced budget for future years. This council therefore resolves to 1. Invite the MPs for Pendle and Clitheroe and Burnley constituencies to an early meeting with the council to discuss issues affecting our borough, and 2. Request the Prime Minister and relevant Secretaries of State to provide a fair funding settlement for local councils that adequately addresses the level of need, and that the 2 MPs for the borough be asked to support this request as vigorously as possible. Mr. Mayor, the reason for the amendment in moving this is because I submitted this before the July the 4th and before the general election was held, and clearly the result was a resounding victory for the Labour Party nationally and in winning the seats that cover our borough. So I think it's entirely appropriate for us to thank Andrew Stevenson for the work that he's carried out during the past 14 years, and to congratulate the 2 winners of that election as well. In terms of the thrust of the resolution, it's about the difficulties that we face in Pendle, and we've referred to this earlier in the meeting. when we've talked about the funding or the inadequate funding that there is for services here in our borough. And that affects all residents. We have a situation where for the past number of years, and I would say 14, that funding has been withdrawn from Pendle. We had a document at the executive last night which showed that in the past decade and a bit, effectively we have lost 50% of the budget of this council. As the auditor outlined earlier in the meeting, we have a shortfall which would mean huge cuts in services in Pendle if we are not to avert those. And we need to get upstream to influence government, to get the MPs for our area fighting on our behalf to ensure that new funding settlements actually reflect the need that we have in our borough, to ensure that the funding that flows from those settlements is adequate to provide the level of services that residents in our borough expect and deserve. We've got an opportunity to reset our relationship with our parliamentarians, plural now. I think that it's something that we need to do as a matter of urgency. We need to get in on the ground floor, get an understanding of the issues. I've spoken about funding because that's central to my role in Pendle Council. But if we look at all sorts of indicators, the indices of deprivation, there are huge challenges facing Pendle. To some extent, they have not been addressed. Well, to a large extent, they have not been addressed in recent years, and they need to be. But I think fundamentally, we need to ensure that our residents here in Pendle, in either constituency, get a fair deal, and that fair deal affects every single resident, from babies through to senior citizens, and that as a council we can provide the facilities and services that are desperately needed and deserved. I move.
Mr Mayor, I'll second that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Leader. Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm happy to support the motion, and also thank Andrew Stevenson for all his hard work over the last 14 years, and congratulations to Jonathan Hinder as a new MP, and Oliver Ryan was MP. And I think it's crucial that we've not had any, that we have a long-term settlement from the government, so we can plan ahead, and that will give those councils like ours stability and plan services that meets the needs and requirements of the local people. And there are some major issues, and Councillor touched on some of them. Things like poverty, housing, health inequalities. We need to tackle these, and we need some major programs that brings funding and resources to tackle this. And something similar to housing market renewal or the health and well-being aspect of it. So I'm happy to support the motion. I think Councillor Whip said that 50% of our funding has been cut over the last 14 years. I think it's a lot more than that. I think it's probably between 65 and 70%. So yeah, I think Conservative government.
Councillor P. Whip.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. I think one of the key issues facing this borough is the lack of a robust transport network. One of the key things that this council has supported over the years has been the Colne-Skipton rail line. And I think it's imperative that in our discussion with our new MPs that we get that on the agenda as soon as possible. So, Mr. Mayor, I would move a friendly amendment, point 3, that the council expresses its support for the reopening of the Colne Skipton rail line and invites them to a meeting with the council and CELRAP to discuss how they will support the reopening of the line in the years to come, or perhaps months if they get the ball rolling and we have a rail plan from the new government. So I hope that's accepted as a friendly. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I'm going to have to decline that friendly amendment. I think that is getting too specific. I think it's certainly something that we would raise in discussions, but I think we are in danger of adding a long list of items. I've specifically left this general so that we could talk to the MPs in a sensible session about the breadth of the problems without honing in on anything specifically. So I'm going to decline the friendly amendment. I admire Councillor Tom Whip's efforts in trying to pursue this.
Councillor Yazdick.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I wasn't going to speak because Councillor Whip's motion wasn't too contentious until he amended it to include the word thank Mr. Stevenson. Now, I would disagree with that. I think I would congratulate everybody here and the people of Pendle that this man has finally left Pendle. 14 years. What's he delivered? We talked about the NHS. Mr. Leader, you talked about the NHS, the funding. I think you also mentioned the council funding. That's a clear example here. In the last 14 years, and I've been a councillor, I think I was elected the same year or the year after he was elected. What have we got as a council? Since I've been a councillor, it's been declining, cut after cut, every year, whether it's a Conservative leadership, whether it's a Labour leadership, whether it's a Liberal Democrat leadership. So what are we actually thanking him for? I don't think we should thank him. What's he done? He was doing his job. He hasn't brought any, in my opinion, significant funding. He was doing his job then. He was being paid handsomely, nearly a six-figure salary. So what are we actually thanking him for? Mr. Levy mentioned a list of things, and before that, in saying that he mentioned that we should thank him. I think we should thank him because, for me, his legacy will always be that when the issue of Gaza happened, this is a man who abstained when bombs were being dropped on children. His constituents are asking him to vote. He abstained. And that was evident from this election. There were certain wards in this year he did not even bother. He couldn't face the people. Now, he should have represented them. So what I think that we should definitely not thank him, and that, in my view, Mr. Mayor, would be his legacy when what was happening, and it still is happening, what the ICC have described as a plausible case of genocide. This is a man who said, so I would definitely be against that. In terms of the new MP, now it was a different situation actually this year because there's no Labour council set. So the first time I think in history, we have 2 Labour MPs for this ward, or for this Pendle council, one being Burnley and one being Pendle and Clitheroe, without any Labour councillors. Now, I obviously welcome the fact that we should work with these MPs and invite them. The previous MP, I've never been in the position that you are in cabinet leader, but I'm not sure how many meetings you've had with the MP. You've been a councillor leader for a number of years. I think when the Conservatives take over, he's had to have their meetings. So again, I would ask you to reflect, Mr. Leader, on, and in fact I'd ask the mover of this motion to reflect on that, because in the past, Mr. Mayor, Councillor Whip hasn't had many good things to say about, and I commend him for that kind of generosity and that kind of democratic process, just to thank him, but I'll ask him to reflect on that and perhaps take that out because he hasn't even met you probably as deputy leader. And this is an MP who should be working with the council, with constituents to bring in more funding. And I think that when the Labour government's honeymoon period is over, and I don't give it very long, I give it less than a year, it'll be interesting to see what the new Labour MPs deliver for Pendle. Councillor Wick referred to the rail line. Mr. Stevenson, the person we want to thank, was rail minister, I want to say, the transport minister, one of them, and that wasn't provided. Now, the new MPs, if I'm honest, I'm not holding much out for them because they are, like Mr. Stevenson was a career politician. And these men, both of them, in my view, although we should work with them, but I wouldn't hold your breath if you really want some significant funding. Significant funding that this council needs, our constituents need, because it has been in decline, as I said, for the last 14 years. Thank you very much.
Councillor Anwar.
Yeah, I agree somewhat with Councillor Iqbal based on the emotional roller coaster that we did have from the 7th of October. But having said that, I know Councillor Iqbal doesn't have much faith in what the two new MPs may bring, but what we have to remember is that the residents of Pendle voted them in. So in the essence of the theme of what we've been saying here today and the auditor's report about working together, having more transparency, open, kind of dialogue, I think it's imperative that we do work with them regardless of what we associate with them to, and to give it a chance. In terms of before David Whip spoke about not having an amendment to it, I just want to talk about this in respect to the education sector. The report does mention that the council has a significant cost when it relates to supporting families who've got children with special educational needs, and rightly so. But there does need to be something that can be a bit more long-term, something more well thought out, where we can support those families without having massive costs. So yes, we don't want to have a massive list of specific things, as Councillor Whip said, but I just wanted the council to know that that is something that I'm passionate about, and that is a discussion that I would like to have with the two new MPs.
Mr. Stone.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I get the rare honour of following Councillor Yasser Iqbal this time, who has displayed tonight that he is indeed a Pendle true independent. And notwithstanding his comments on Gaza, and I have a lot of sympathy with your views on Gaza, as you know. However, Andrew, I think, primarily should be remembered for the hard work that he's done addressing concerns of local Pendle residents with local issues that they face in their lives. And I feel it would be a shame if Gaza was to overshadow that in some way. So I welcome the amendment. Indeed, the original wording is very welcome. I think we all know that we face huge problems in Pendle, particularly as has been mentioned earlier, around poverty and housing, and us delivering and defending the services that we deliver to our residents, and hopefully extending them and making them good quality, affordable services. So for me, I absolutely do welcome this motion, and that's it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Duffer.
I think Councillor Alvarez first time. No, you go first. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to pick up really on Councillor Ruby's point in relation to education. There is another factor here. Of course, we represent a borough which is very diverse, from Nelson Bradfield all the way to Bunnell to Canavy. And I raised this issue a couple of councils ago in relation to the previous government's policy on immigration. And I know in this King's speech there was commentary on migration, and of course this government's methodology in trying to tackle migration. But it's left families up and down this borough still worried about their immigration status because of the draconian earnings requirements rather, set by the previous government, raising the earnings threshold all the way to £29,000 per annum for people who are wishing to sponsor family members from abroad. There were recommendations for that to actually even have a further rise all the way to £34,000. How on earth families and sponsors will be able to sponsor or rather keep on sponsoring their partners based on that draconian measure, will yet to be seen. And I'm hoping colleagues will agree with me that family union is a really important aspect of our borough to ensure not only whilst we try and tackle the issue of austerity and cost of living and the standard of living, that we also have to bring peace about families in terms of their current family settle. I've got family members who come to my office weekly, Mr. Mayor, still raising concerns, falling into depression, in fact falling into separation, trying to tackle some of the draconian immigration measures which the previous government brought about. So while Councillor Stone and Councillor Iqbal quite rightly bring up some of the other key issues which have obviously arisen over the last 6 months, which, as Councillor Stone puts out, he doesn't want that to be the legacy of our former MP, Mr. Stevenson. I'm really sorry to say that there's a lot more to daily life here in Pendle, alongside those very important issues of Gaza, that people will remember him and of course the government by. But of course, as the motion sets out quite clearly, we're looking to try and turn a page. This is democracy in action, and we want democracy to work for the people that we represent in the borough too. So hopefully Council can note those comments in relation to the policy of immigration to Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Nadine.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to first of all touch upon the point Councillor Iqbal made in terms of the situation in Gaza. I, for one, didn't see eye to eye, and it's in public domain with Andrew Stevenson, our MP, and the policy decision of the then government. I made my views perfectly clear. We had then discussions on more than one occasion about the direction and the wrong direction, in my view, the government took in terms of foreign policy, not just the Conservative government, but supported by the Labour Party and other parties at the time as well. Having said that, I've known Andrew for the last 14 years. I think Andrew has been a really hard-working MP for our area. And I think for that, I think it's right that we do thank him for that specific element. I know people will have different views, but I think for his hard work for Pendle. When we talk about the investment that has come into Pendle, there has been huge amounts of investment that's come into Pendle. I'm not saying it's enough, because it's never enough money. We've had the Nelson Town deal, the additional 20 million for Nelson over the next 10 years, UK Shared Prosperity Fund, Levelling Up Fund, and for our leisure services, there has been large amounts of money that has come in. That hasn't solved the problems. The problems are still there, because there's a real need for far more significant amounts of money. I think if we want to build a relationship with the two new MPs, I think in life, I think we have to, if we want to work with our partners, I think there has to be that mutual respect. We might have policy differences, that's fine, nothing wrong with that at all. But I think over the years we've seen some of the personal comments and attacks on our MP in this chamber, and I think them sort of comments in the public forum are not helpful if we want to build relations. You can't on the one hand be critical of a person, nothing wrong with attacking policies, but I think once it gets personal, I think that crosses the line. And I think hopefully we'll have a new chapter and have some good relationship with the two MPs and try and work together in partnership to benefit our residents, because that's what we're all here for. In terms of the specific point about education, totally agree again with Councillor on a really valid point. And I think long-term education, just about special education need children, and also just education attainment overall, because that builds success and future for our future generations, and that's the key. Councillor Ali talked about the income threshold. Totally agree again on that point. I think it was the wrong decision at the time by the government to increase it. I think it's really unfair. I think we will see what the Labour government does in terms of that, because some of the comments which are coming out and during the election and since then in terms of immigration and migration generally. Let's see what the new government does in terms of the income threshold for spouse visas. I would, as Councillor Wicklow said, I'm not holding my breath. I think there's been lots of promises made. We'll see if they can deliver. I think it's going to be really difficult for the new government, but let's see. They've made lots of promises. Let's see if they can fulfil them. And I'm sure the councillors, the Labour councillors in this chamber can and work with their leader, the saviour, Sir Keir Starmer. And I'm sure the leader has got that special relationship with Keir Starmer, and he'll be coming down the motorway with lots of money for Pendle. So we've heard them sort of discussion before. Let's see if that money materialises for Pendle.
Councillor Newman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. From my perspective, from the organisations that I go to, the only thing that I can thank Andrew Stevenson for are the increase in the food banks that we have, and all the volunteers have to do the work that they or he and his organisation should have done while he was our MP. Thank you.
Can I just ask for clarification? I know there's been a lot of discussion on the wording of the motion around congratulating and congratulating winners or for the hard work an MP may not have done. But I've just read the motion. It doesn't actually say any of those things. I think that was just what Councillor Whip had said in his speech, which he's perfectly entitled to. So I'm thinking if everybody's happy with how it's written at the moment, I think we can move for progress.
Mr. Hartley.
I've listened to you all and I'm new to the council. So it's very rare for me to actually get up and speak. What I would like to say about Andrew Stevenson, and you just mentioned there, he was always available for photograph, whether it was the opening of the door or whatever. But he was always there, and he was always there with a smile. I can't knock him for that. And I did notice that on Armed Forces Day, that the new Labour MP did the same thing. He managed to jump in at the last minute for a photograph with the Armed Forces, and he didn't even attend the ceremony. So I think it's following in the same vein. And to bring the money all the way up for Pendle, I think it's a good thing. But the money, when it gets to Pendle, it's like throwing a stone into a pond. It seems to stay nearest the town hall and work its way out slowly to the outer limits. I'd like to see a reverse of that, and I'd like to see the money being taken to the outer limits first, such as Barnford and work its way back. What's left come back to the town council, and I think we'd have a lot more happy people around the borough willing to support everything that we do. Thank you.
Councillor Dorothy North.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think we need to move forward. We've got 2 new MPs. I think Councillor Wick, when he said, what did he say? Congratulations. Yeah. I think he was just happy. He was happy. I didn't really want to say.
Councillor Dorothy North, you can't speak a second me.
But we've now got to accept, obviously. We've got 2 MPs. And we're going to move forward.
Yeah, move forward.
Let's get on with it.
Yeah, I agree.
Can we put it to the vote?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, I want to respond to the debate, Mr. Mayor. In moving the resolution as set out, I amended it to include thanking former MP Andrew Stevenson and congratulating the two new MPs on their election. Now, I did so in an attempt to express the council's congratulations to the two new MPs. And I thought, well, hang on a minute, that's going to be a bit divisive because this got over it and won't want that. So I put in the bit about thanking Andrew Stevenson so as to balance it up.
You're making it
No, I'm not making it up. This is a thought process. So we're in a position where this council, as has been pointed out, has no councillors of the persuasion of our sitting MPs. And I think that behoves us to make huge efforts in order to build a relationship and to ensure that we can get those MPs working on behalf of the whole of Penrith and in particular addressing the issues that this council has. Now, I agree with Councillor Yasser Iqbal. I don't like the legacy of the Tories, and picking up on further comments that were made, Councillor Ahmed said that huge amounts of money have come to Penrith. We've got town deal this and UKSBF that. I just point out that those amounts of money are a drop in the ocean to the amounts of money.
I didn't say that. I spoke.
I wrote it down.
No, but I said it's never enough money. I didn't say that.
Yeah. But he said there's huge Andrew Stevenson got huge amounts of money.
Waste of time.
The point is that we have lost, and somebody else, another point, Asgard, said that he thought that the cuts had been bigger than 50%. I'm talking that this council budgets have been cut by 50%. Government funding has come down by 70%. So, sort of take all away and then give a little bit back. That has been the thing. Now, I don't disagree with that, and I am no friend of the Conservatives, but I'm no friend of Labour either. I sit here as a councillor that wants to do, and I'm sure that we all do, we want to do our very best to ensure that people in Penrith get the best deal, the fairest deal that they possibly can. So we have to build bridges, we have to build relationships. And if that means being rather more gracious than what I sort of sincerely feel, then I think that's incumbent upon us as individuals and us as a council. Councillor Tomwick asked about CELRAP, and I think the debate then went on to pick out lots of different issues, all of which need to be taken up with the MPs. Councillor Stone said it's a shame if Gaza are overshadowed. Well, Gaza did, in respect to the elections within the Pendle Borough, overshadow a lot of other issues for a lot of communities. And I think that needs to be recognised, and we need to work through that. And we don't want a position where we become ever more divided. I'd like to see a position where we become ever more united. And in moving this tonight, I did not want any polarisation in this chamber. I wanted to see unanimous vote. If I've lost Councillor Iqbal's, I very much regret that. And I would urge him to pinch his nose and put his hand up. I've not got much time with the rest of this, but Councillor Newman said thank Andrew Stevenson for his increase in food banks, and I think that was sincerely meant, given Brian's work. And Councillor Hartley said that the government needs to take the money to the outer limits and that reminded me of a sci-fi programme that I used to watch in my youth. And it's a bit weird and wonderful. It might be weird and wonderful if we get to money takers in out in it, but it is about time that we did. Mr Mayor, I hope that there will be, if not unanimity, that this will be passed now.
Councillor Lima.
So, Mr Mayor, I'm responding to the debate. Mr Mayor,
can we put it to vote? All those in favour of the Councillor Whip? All those against? Absent? Yes, please. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a safe journey home.
Jane.
Councillors, ladies and gentlemen, please, Councillor
Jane, how did you find your last meeting? Were we relatively well behaved?
In all fairness, we should thank Jane with a round of applause. That's